everyone, it's Maddie
and V, and today we're going to be showing you a week in our reading life. Let's get to it.
So I'm starting with the Loose Ends list by Carrie Firestone. I'm 165 pages through it, which means I've got about 200 left to go. This is all about Maddie, who goes on a cruise with her family to say goodbye to her grandmother, who's just announced that she's dying of pancreatic cancer and would like them to go on a worldwide adventure before she dies. The cruise ship is exclusively for people with life-threatening illnesses who also want to say goodbye to their family in a memorable way. This book so far has been quietly emotional because there have been some scenes where Maddie is interacting with the passengers who are already contemplating ending their lives early, and she's also realising that some of the people she didn't think were sick actually are. But to cut the emotional tension, you've got her developing romance with Enzo, who's the son of the owner of the ship. So she feels a little bit guilty that she wants to prioritise spending time with him rather than her grandmother. Every single member of Maddie's family is kind of remarkable and have something about them that makes them quirky. In that way, it's slightly unrealistic, but it's definitely an interesting read seeing them all interact with each other. So I'm 70 pages further than when we last spoke. They've so far gone to Bermuda, Iceland, and now they're in Rome. It's really quick, and we don't actually get to spend a lot of time with them in these locations. It's more about the family's interactions rather than the sightseeing, which I do kind of appreciate, even though the landscapes that have been chosen are so interesting and contrasting. Maddie has had to leave behind Enzo on the ship as she's going to meet up with him later, and so there's a bigger family focus, and I'd say I'm definitely enjoying those sections more because it's the poignant moments when she talks to her grandma that I feel like I'm on the edge of tears all the time. My favourite relationship is probably hers with Paige, who is another patient on the ship. She's a young mother who has a brain tumour, but she's giving Maddie loads of advice about going to college and acting like a sorority sister, and that's just such a sweet dynamic. Also, getting to know all of the other passengers beyond their illness is really great, and seeing that you don't have to know someone for years and years to have a meaningful experience with them. And that's it. I'm done with the Loose Ends list, and I really enjoyed it in the end, actually. It did make me cry as we were just saying goodbye to people one after the other. I was really surprised with the tone of this book, how it managed to balance the humour and brevity of their adventures with the grief of the situation. There were some surprising moments where characters got to come out of their shell, especially Maddie's brother Jeb. The final thing that he does for their grandmother was just so touching to know that he'd been working on it behind the scenes throughout the whole book. I feel like there are a lot of ideas in this, like the Loose Ends list concept itself, where you just come up with like a bucket list of things that you want to achieve, and also the whole letters in a bottle thing to kind of forgive your own sins. And finally, probably the most important one of capturing snow globe moments, which were important to the family at each of their stops, that they did something that they would remember. I really liked the fact that the romance was realistic, because even though they were sharing this big experience together of letting go of people that they loved, Enzo and Maddie realised that they're still on a holiday romance. There's still like thousands of miles between where they live, so it just becomes a snow globe moment of their own. I'm really kicking myself for not picking this one up sooner, and I'm going to give it 4.5 stars. The only reason it's not a 5-star for me is the fact that it did get slightly repetitive in its form towards the end, but it got me with the tears, so that definitely gets a big recommendation from me. The book I was partway through and want to finish now is All the Lonely People by David Owen. I was convinced to pick this up because I had heard Alice Oseman on her Instagram talk about this a lot, and it had a lot of my buzzwords as well, like FF romance, and it's discussing online culture. I also have read the sampler of this in my Try chapter last summer after Yalk, and I really liked that too, so I was already convinced that I was going to enjoy it, but just hearing someone else say good things always encourages me to pick a book up sooner.
There's a little pixelated girl as the chapter header, and at every chapter she disintegrates just a little bit more. Let's look at a later chapter. So we're on 6 now, so I was like 17% through. Let's try 14. Yeah, look at her go!
All the Lonely People is the story of Kat, who has completely poured all of her identity into her website, and then some nasty boys from her sixth form decide to post doctored pornography, and so she takes the website down. And it's in this moment where she chooses not to be herself anymore, that she would rather be anything else, that she starts to disconnect from life as well as the internet. This causes the fade, which is where she sort of becomes invisible, and there are rumours about other people who have also experienced the fade, and she's just met another girl called Safa, and she's also experiencing the fade, but she's slightly further along, and she runs this group called All the Lonely People, which is sort of like a weird cult that's encouraging other children and teens to want to fade as well, because apparently it's something that you want to happen. Kat goes to a meeting and learns more about it, and they find that the bad effects of the fade is that people slowly start to forget you in the real life. This is told through two POVs, however, so you have Kat on one side who's actually experiencing the fade, and you have Wes, one of the boys who caused her to fade in the first place. His story is more about his brother coming back home after a super long absence and dealing with a stepfather who he doesn't get along with quite well. Not that he's abusive, I just don't think that he's accepting him into the home, and he's starting to feel guilty about what he's done to Kat, and he thinks because he can still remember her that he can save her. So he's following on this group of all the lonely people as well, and he's on this like side quest to go and find someone who has been completely erased from people's minds because he's faded completely. I have to say that I am liking Wes's perspective maybe a little bit more over Kat's, just at this point anyway, because he's on a bit more of an adventure, whereas Kat is quite heavy. So whenever I'm reading Kat, I'm like, girl, you need to find something that's going to ground you and hold you to this world, otherwise you're gonna fade completely, and that doesn't sound like a good thing. Before I keep going, I think I'm gonna go and check and see how Maddie is doing, because we are reading things separately, because sometimes we get very distracted by each other's reading pace. So let's go see what she's up to.
How's it going?
I am at 290, which means I have under 100 pages left to go.
Yeah. Do you think you're going to be able to do that in one sitting?
Yeah, pretty much. This is getting really pacey now as it's heading towards the end, so that's good.
He was going to steal a car. He just hadn't worked out how yet.
I've just finished All the Lonely People. I read it so quickly because I needed to know what happens next. I really enjoyed this book. I'm definitely going to give it 5 stars because it's one that I'm going to have to chew on for a lot longer. I loved the developing FF romance throughout the whole thing. It was really sweet and genuine how they were friends first. They were getting to know each other because they're in such a difficult situation. Like, you have to be immediate. So in some ways it felt very slow paced, and in others it was quite quick. As for Wes, David Owen has completely turned having a male and female POV, like all of the expectations of that, on its head. Whilst Wes plays a huge part in Kat's life, Kat sees him at the beginning, obviously, as this boy who has destroyed her life, and then at the end as something quite different, but that doesn't mean that she's resolved any of her feelings towards him. So I really enjoyed their relationship, even though they didn't really have one, but I felt like the decisions that were made at the end between the two of them were so strong, and probably compelled me to give this 5 stars even more because I thought it was such a brave choice. I also need to mention just the discussion of internet culture and being online and the effects that can have on your personality and how you view yourself, because it was so nuanced, very delicately done as well, and really made me think. Like, a lot of the way that things were phrased caused me to reflect on my life online and how I've felt like sometimes I've just wanted to be sucked into my persona, as it were, that I present on the internet. I'm definitely going to be recommending this one throughout the year. It's a standout book and David Owen's finest. The next thing we're going to be finishing today is a book that both Maddie and I have started, and that is Shadow Kiss, the 3rd book in the Vampire Academy series by Rochelle Mead. We're reading this on our Kindle to and from work, and now we've got a few days off. We can flip over to the physical edition. We pretty much got to the halfway point, so there are still 200 pages until the end. And you can hear our thoughts on this one when we eventually upload our books 1 to 3 review. Wedge it in.
How long is that one, just out of curiosity?
This one is 503 pages long.
Wow, so nearly 100 pages longer than the last one.
I'll move this one to our TBR shelf now that we are finally finished with Shadow Kiss. Now we're going to move on to books that we haven't already started. I'm choosing Two Can Keep a Secret by Karen M. McManus, and I'm going with Of Fire and Stars by Audrey Colthurst, which I thought was on my 90-day TBR plan, but turns out it was from, I think my sister fixed my TBR from ages ago. So it's about time I got around to it. And we only just bought this one, so I'm reading a relatively new book whilst you're kicking something off of your TBR. My book is 325 pages, and mine is 390. It would be amazing if I could finish it at the same time that Maddie finishes hers. This is all about a town called Echo Ridge, where homecoming queens have a reputation of being killed. The blurb doesn't tell us much about what the story is going to be in the present, so I'm very intrigued to see how this one will be told. I really liked her first book, One of Us is Lying, so hopefully this will be just as good as that one was. I'm only 30 pages in, and it's been established that there are going to be 2 perspectives to this story. Ellery, who's just moved to Echo Ridge with her twin brother, and they've returned to the town because it's where their mother grew up, and her mother's sister Sarah was one of the girls that went missing, although they don't actually know that much about it. And the second perspective is Malcolm, who is the brother of Declan, and Declan was accused of the second murder. So family is obviously going to play a huge role in this, I think, but it's just been revealed there's a plot for the homecoming killer to strike again. I've really enjoyed the setup so far, and and I'm preferring Ellery's perspective at this point, but I have read twice as much from her as I have Malcolm, so we'll see if that changes as it goes on.
Yesterday, I got roughly halfway through A Fire and Stars because it's a surprisingly quick read. It's told through two POVs. You have Denna and Mare. Denna is the princess, and Mare is her love interest, and she's also the sister of Denna's betrothed. So far, I felt very much like an observer of these two characters' stories, and maybe it's because I don't care about horses, and that's half of what Mare talks about. But I think it's just because, like, you can see that they have feelings for each other, but they're finding it really hard to express them, and obviously you have the tentative political situation that means they can't really be free, which is odd because there are other background LGBT relationships in this book, therefore it's not radical in this world for the two of them to be together, but obviously I guess in a position of power like the queens they may one day become, then it probably is. To that end, it's reading a lot like the queer Regency romances I was reading for university last year. The way that they're like gently dancing around each other, everyone else seeing them as just friends, but they obviously have a tender relationship when they're in private, is just giving out those 1900s vibes. The rest of the plot is to do with magic. Denna has fire magic, although it seems like she may have some other magics as well, and that puts her at great risk because the community that she is becoming a part of hunts magicians. There's also political intrigue in the fact that there's an assassin on the loose getting rid of people close to the royal family, and it seems like whoever is doing that is trying to frame magic users. I'm going to try and read the rest of it in one sitting, so let's go.
I'm about 150 pages through, and Brooke, one of the nominated homecoming queens, has just gone missing, and Malcolm was the last person to be seen with her. She was doing something really sketchy before that Ellery witnessed as well, and so now she and Malcolm are going to work together to try and find out what happened to her. I'm feeling quite suspicious of the girl that's writing the newspaper articles about the incidents that are happening, because it feels like she has some kind of ulterior motive for reporting on it, maybe just to make herself the centre of attention. And also we're going back to Declan, who's just come back to town, and it's suspicious that that lines up with Brooke going missing. Ellery is really interested in murder investigations, so she's thinking of herself as a bit of a detective at this point, and so she is trying to piece together the clues. I just hope that she can come up with a solution.
As you can tell from the emojis next to their names, Denna is the fire and Mare is the stars that it talks about in the title.
It's probably because there are two POVs to alternate between that's facilitating short chapters, but it definitely feels weird reading a fantasy where you don't ever quite get into grips with the scene or wherever the character is before swapping onto a new one. And unfortunately, I just don't have a preference between Denna or Mare because neither of their perspectives are particularly exciting. You'd think there would be a lot more with Denna, like, hiding for her life, essentially. She's like a pigeon among cats. Her mother and her sister also got to come and visit her, and that was a really nice scene because at the very beginning in the prologue and the first few chapters you realise that Denna is very close to her family, so to be alienated from them, I think that just took a little bit of the spark from her. And now that she's seen them and been a little bit reassured, hopefully she'll get a little bit stronger in my eyes.
Half an hour and 50 pages later, we finally get to know what Ellery's theory is, and it's actually adding up pretty well. She suspects Malcolm's stepsister, Katrine. All of the evidence seems to be really stacking up against her, and I would be surprised if she turned out to be the killer just because we've still got about 80 pages of the book left, so there's no way they'd reveal who it actually was at this point. But I'd almost respect the story more if they just ended up being right, because that's often what you've got to think with thrillers, that who they're pushing you towards thinking it obviously isn't going to be, and whoever you think of last is who it's actually going to be. But I think it would be a really nice flip if that wasn't the case. And just a side note about the characters, I'd say that I'm finding the romance between Ellery and Malcolm to be a little forced. Like, it's not entirely necessary, they could have just been sleuthing besties, but instead we're getting this romance thread coming through, and it just feels a little bit unnecessary. So I'm finally finished with To Keep a Secret, and I didn't see the murderer coming. I can't say I was really working to put it together myself, just because I was so convinced by Ellery's theory, even though it came 80 pages too soon. This one reminded me a lot more of a Sarah Shepard story than it did Karen M. McManus's first book. If you've read The Amateurs or maybe The Perfectionists, then this one is a good read for you. I think it had a different vibe to One of Us is Lying, and I think the two characters worked really well because it kept the story really close and plot driven rather than character driven. It was quite a succinct story being so short. I think I'm going to say that I actually enjoyed it more than her first book, so I'll definitely be keeping an eye out for her third, and I'm going to give this one 4 stars.
There you have it, that's the 390 pages that make up this book finished. I got to the end and I have to say, things were happening, reveals were revealed, and I don't think I was really surprised. Maybe because I hadn't felt encouraged enough to care throughout the story. I have to say I was always more interested in the romance than what was going on, like the explosions in the background. So I don't know what to say other than that I'm a little disappointed with this one. But from what I've read in reviews, I don't seem to be the only one. Before I make any final judgments on this author though, I'm definitely going to have to read her next book, because I did enjoy her writing. Like, A Fire and Stars was extremely readable, very easy to read. I loved the pace. I knew whenever a reveal happened that it was well done and in the right place. I just wish that the story itself had been something I'd liked more.
In the car ride to and from Reading, we managed to read 52% of Serious Moonlight by Jen Bennett. This is her new book all about Birdie, who works at a hotel and starts falling in love with one of the boys that already works there. They're also trying to solve a mystery, as Birdie really likes murder, and that's all linked to her past. The thing is, with the boy Daniel, who she is sort of falling in love with, but not really at this point, she had a one-night stand with him before she started working at the hotel that he also works in. So it's a huge embarrassment for her, and she doesn't want to talk about it at all, which means she starts closing herself off to him. This dilemma pretty much took up the first quarter of the book, and it really slowed the pace down. You don't actually get to the mystery until they're well and firmly in the hotel and friends, which is about 30%. Even though they're clearly both into each other, they keep holding bits of their past back, which I think at this point everything has finally come out in the open, such as the death of Birdie's mother and her situation, the way that she is just trying to find her own identity and her own independence. At the moment, it's definitely not my favourite Jen Bennett, but I think as it takes the murder mystery spin, I'll start to enjoy it a little more. There have been a few scenes that are very, like, quote-unquote romantic, such as them getting stuck in a tiny little room together and having a make-out session. Things like that are immediately cut up by one of the characters running away, which I have to admit is probably one of my least favourite tropes in romance. Essentially, it's miscommunication to the max. And also it's relying very heavily on the question and answer way of getting to know each other, in the you tell me one truth and I'll tell you a truth about you, and to be honest, that's a little tired for me. There's just something about the way it's playing out that I have no idea what the next 50% of this book is going to be. Like, yeah. I suppose the murder mystery thing has to get a lot stronger. They're investigating this guy that keeps coming to the hotel. There's something to do with his identity maybe, or drugs. Yeah, and I think he's also an author of mystery books himself. So... Well, that's what they think anyway. Yeah. There's a lot of different concepts, so I wish it was a little bit more about the hotel in itself, because that setting we were really excited for. Yeah. So the blurb totally drew me in, and at the moment the execution is putting me off. So let's see how we find the rest of it. This is definitely my least favourite Jen Bennett book that we've read, and I'd probably settle around a 2-star rating. In our previous clip, we said that we thought everything had been revealed between the two characters, but that was so wrong. The last percent we had to read, like, they each had another reveal about themselves that made them feel differently about each other, and we hated how Birdie wanted to make Daniel's problems all about her for some reason. It was just really selfish, and I was really disappointed that the murder mystery aspect and the hotel setting weren't used to their full potential. These characters were ridiculously frustrating, and Daniel was a lovely guy, but Birdie just, I couldn't stomach her for a lot of the book. We did contemplate DNFing it through the book because we realised we didn't like it quite soon into the story, but because we liked all of Jen Bennett's other books, we did want to give it a chance. But Serious Moonlight just reminded us to trust our gut, and if we're not enjoying it, to put it down. But it also reminded me that contemporaries can just sometimes be a collection of moments between characters and don't really have to have one overarching plot, because there were so many elements to this story, and I think maybe that was the problem, that it was a little bit too busy. And that's everything we read across a single week. Let us know what you've been reading recently in the comments. Thank you everyone so much for watching. Don't forget that you can follow us on Instagram and Twitter at MaddieandB. We post videos every Sunday, so subscribe if you haven't already. We'll see you next time.